So imagine if your doctor called you and she says, "Oh, come in. I need to talk to you about those tests we did." She sits you down, looks you in the eye, pulls out the scan, puts it on the light box, points to a big black lumpy mass and says, "And that's the reason that even with aggressive treatment, you've probably got about 5 years to live." Imagine what those 5 years might be like, and how would her prognosis affect your choices about what you did and didn't want to do with your day? How would it affect how you see things? A beautiful blue sky, the smell of a lovely flower, the giggle of a child, some good or bad news. Now imagine, if you will, that you chose to have an incredible life at the same time as knowing that information. What would that be like? And what would it be like if now you're living on the other side of that 5-year mark? What would every extra minute, second, hour, day be like? This is exactly the experience of my guest this week, Tim Baker. So let me tell you about my guest today. Tim Baker is a globally renowned surf journalist. He's an author, and he's someone his words have really shaped the narrative around surfing in not only our country of Australia, but around the world for decades now. His books really are the pillars of surf history and the surfing personalities in Australia. Occy, High Surf, A Century of Surf, many, many more. His writing embodies the journey of surfing from almost a countercultural pastime through to gigantic board and clothing manufacturers worth billions of dollars, through to surfers today who are unbelievably gifted but really kind of shun the competitive aspect of the sport and instead embrace the exploration and the spiritual experience that comes with being present in the moment, bobbing around on a board out in the ocean, breathing, just waiting for the next wave. Tim was living the dream. A beautiful family, a lifetime of exotic travel under his belt, a family home, walking distance to top quality waves that he could surf. And then one day, in July of 2015, out of the blue, Tim was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic prostate cancer. His story of a descent into the debilitating world of aggressive cancer treatment and his fight for survival is just absolutely brilliant. He was given just 5 years to live, and Tim found a way to be with the diagnosis, to be with the fear, to choose to enjoy his life, his family, and indeed each day, and have this aggressive medical timeline which was counting down his days. Tim chose a path forward filled with empathy for his carers, who would often be just burned out and hollow people after just hours and days and years of essentially carrying the burden of their patient's imminent death with them. It'd be hard to be an oncologist. Tim chose a path where he allowed himself to be empowered enough to seek out different pathways of treatment. Now, as you know, I lost my mum to cancer about 5 years ago. So much of what Tim spoke about was incredibly familiar. And if you've been through or you're going through something similar, this is simply a chat you've got to hear, because Tim is choosing to pat the shark instead of punch the shark. The book is called Patting the Shark. It's out now. There's a link in the show notes. Enjoy this chat with Tim Baker. Tim, it's thanks for being on the show, mate. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Nice to see you. And I don't want to start on a bummer note, but I'm sure you knew Davo, and I'm sorry, because you would have worked closely with him over the years and watched his career rise. And not far from where you are right now, he was the victim of pretty horrible violence, and he died. This extraordinary surfer with an amazing legacy, and that must be a difficult thing to go through in the community that is quite close of people who have been around competitive surfing for so long.
Yeah, it's super sad news. I mean, I wasn't especially close to Davo. I'd run into him off and on over the years, but it's interesting you bring it up because I just started writing a column called The Long History of Australian Surfing's Flawed Heroes, because, it's sad, but then it kind of makes me angry too, because there's this kind of highway littered with casualties.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes surfing has celebrated that dysfunction and that, the drugs and alcohol, and, picks up kids when they're hot and they move units for sponsors, and then when they no longer move units, they're just cast aside, It reminded me of when, people who buy a cute puppy for Christmas and then by Easter they don't want it.
Yeah,
It's but it keeps happening and we don't seem to learn from it.
It is difficult, and I was talking with a mate about it the other day. I only ever know him as Dave. It was Chris, wasn't it? Yeah. He came out of the crew of like extraordinarily gifted Narrabeen surfers. There was just this moment that happened in Narrabeen. It happens a few times, but there was this moment, oddly coincidental with certain cyclone swells. There's the right amount of time of a summer where a kid has enough time to spend enough time in the waves to get as good as, and just kind of have this leapfrog above others. And there was another thing that happened in Coolangatta in the late 90s, early 2000s. And he was a part of this crew of surfers, but Narrabeen in the northern beaches of Sydney is also known for this kind of almost archaic, weird, brutal Lord of the Flies kind of male-dominated, violent kind of culture. I mean, they had a thing called the grommet cage at the surf club. I never forget it, where they go, "Oh no," and they would go, "Ha ha ha!" That's where you lock the 8-year-old or 10-year-old kids who've dropped in on us in. Like it was there for stray dogs, but they were like, "What the fuck is that?" And that sort of brutal shit follows you through life. If you are all a crew of people moving together in a cohort around the world as you advance through the world of, either free surfing or competitive surfing, that kind of shit is hard to escape from. And it's interesting, you're right, you're talking about that column, because I can't stop thinking about Mark Richards, who at 27 or 28 was probably the most professional focused, mindset surfer ever to stand on a board, and and everyone's like, "What do you mean you're starting a shaping business? What do you mean you're..." And he was like, "Oh, I guess I'm too serious for this." And he left. And now Kelly Slater is 50 with 11 world titles, the two most professional people ever. It just blows my mind.
Oh, yeah, I love MR. I just think that's such a class act. And people talk about Kelly's record, 11 world titles, whatever it is now. Can't even keep count. But no one will ever challenge MR's record, which is 100% success rate. He only did the tour for 4 years and won the world title 4 times and walked away.
He's the Heather McKay of surfing. Heather McKay, the Australian squash championship champion. She went 19 years with never being defeated. Never. Not once. Wow. Not once did she lose a game. It's Australian, as far as I'm concerned, one of the greatest athletes in Australia ever, all time. And no one knows her name because it was a amateur sport for women, unfortunately, at the time. But MR, undefeated. What surfer's ever been undefeated? Fucking no one.
And then came out of retirement, won those Billabong Pros at Huge Waimea and Sunset.
Amazing. I'm wondering, I was around the pro tour of surfing for a little while, but it was during my drinking years, Tim, so I don't know if we have met before.
No, I don't recall. It's weird because, when you've been on telly, I guess people feel like they know you.
Right.
But I don't think we have. Maybe, I don't know, did you go to any of those crazy Coca-Cola contest presentation nights at the Metropolis in North Sydney when like Martin Potter won and went on a mad
I was more
bender?
The kind of big events I was at was North Shore Pipe end of 2003, Pro Juniors started 2004. I was at Chopu in 2003, kind of around that. So I don't know if we might have been in the same place that time, but
orbiting each other.
Yeah, but I you write a book about Mark Okolupo. I work quite closely with him because we were working the TV network I was working with at the time had to deal with Billabong, so we worked quite closely with Oki for quite a while there, and a few of those stories. I found it just really interesting. But growing up we're here to talk about integrative cancer treatment, which is really important and
we'll
something.
Talk surfing and guitars.
Well, it's something that something about that I really feel quite strongly about, having seen other mates and relatives go through prostate cancer treatment and the various choices they made through treatment and the various outcomes because of those choices. But also as someone who's very much a fan of patient advocacy and being your own case leader when you can be, which is something I know you did. So I do definitely want to talk about that, but there's too much about surfing that I think is because it paints the picture of what put you in the mindset to get you in those places. So you grew up in what part of the world did you grow up in?
In Melbourne, in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, long way from the beach. No kind of surfing pedigree. I always say I've got French President Francois Mitterrand to thank for becoming a surfer.
How's that?
He was doing the nuclear testing in the South Pacific.
Yes, he was.
My family were travelling back from Canada to Australia, and we were going to stop over in Tahiti, but Qantas were no longer stopping in Tahiti because of the French nuclear testing. So we stopped in Hawaii instead and had the full Brady Bunch in Hawaii experience, where my big brother had surfing lessons and got smitten. And so when we got back to suburban Melbourne, we started holidaying down the coast, and I caught the bug, highly contagious that it is.
Yeah. Wow. And we're old men, and there's USB-powered heated wetsuits that exist now. But we're talking a time when a wetsuit that could keep you literally alive in the Great Southern Ocean off the bottom there of Victoria was really prohibitively expensive for a kid. Even in summer, it's cold as shit.
Yeah.
That must have been tricky to deal with.
Yeah, I remember my first wetsuit was this horrible kind of O'Neill diving wetsuit with this kind of diagonal zip down the front that you kind of laid across, and was really uncomfortable. But then, gradually, worked my way up to a Rip Curl Dawn Patrol. And it's funny you bring up wetsuits because I can picture them all.
Yeah.
My early wetsuits, clear as day, the colour scheme and the fit and the stiff rubber, trying to paddle in them.
If you're from Victoria, or if you're trying to surf out of Melbourne, that is, if you don't have a wetsuit, you can borrow a board, but you're putting on someone else's wetsuit that's been peed in and all this kind of stuff. It's like this most precious thing you can have, and you'll use it until it falls to pieces.
Yeah. And they give you these horrible rash under the arms and other more delicate body parts. And you just smear Vaseline all over yourself to try and stop the rash. Yeah.
Well, so obviously your parents, it's an effort. If you're in the suburban Melbourne, to go surfing is an effort. The roads are way better now, but it would have been a mission, at least hour and a half, 2 hours to get anywhere near where the kids can paddle in. What were your parents' vibe on you and your brother getting in the water?
Oh, look, they weren't especially enthusiastic about it because it was still in the days when surfing was seen as a road to drug addiction and delinquency. I remember a friend of ours had a board shaped by Morris Cole, and he just got busted for a small amount of hashish and went to Pentridge prison for 2 years.
Oh, right.
Stripped of his Victorian titles, and it confirmed every parent's worst fears that surfers were a bunch of drug addicts. And I remember looking at this friend of mine's board and going, wow, that was shaped by this guy who's now in jail. That's pretty cool.
And at the time, surfing also came with its own starter pack. It came with a haircut, and it came with, at the time, records. What was the music that came with this for you, Tim?
That's an interesting question. I'm going to have to really think about that, because surfing and music almost existed in two different worlds for me, because, the other thing I was really into was guitar and playing music. And, I guess Midnight Oil was early surf music for me.
Yeah.
Sunny Boys.
Yeah.
Hoodoo Gurus.
Yeah.
And, a bit later, bands like Gangajan got used in all those Quicksilver videos.
Right.
And a lot of time it was the bands that got used in surf movies that just got that.
So what's interesting is you just mentioned 4 Australian bands in a row. I've got 2 kids, one's 3, one's 18 and a half. And if I asked her, what's the music that's currently shaping your 18-year-old journey, there wouldn't be one Australian artist in it. I think
it's a pretty rich time for Australian music,
and songs that definitely describe. You mentioned 4 bands there that describe a particular time in Australian culture when we were, I guess, a little more isolated culturally from the rest of the world, and the music at the time was reflecting what was going on. There was most definitely with Sunny Boys and even more with Midnight Oil was singing songs about nuclear testing, without a doubt. That was all going on. It was really powerful and really intense, because that was right when Australia was kind of shifting from, Britain to America, which we somehow forgot over the last 3 weeks, when apparently something big happened in the UK.
Lovely old lady.
She passed away. I can't, something anyway. But that was all, it was all on, and surfing and activism and environmental activism were all kind of quite enmeshed because there was a heap of tourism money coming in and people wanting to put a Club Med in Byron Bay and high rises all over the coast where you are now up in, you're in the North Coast, New South Wales, and surfers largely led those fights, which is kind of interesting that protecting those surf breaks and protecting those estuary systems that created these beautiful places.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of ironic because we also sort of led the developers and the hordes to these beautiful places.
Yeah.
We colonised Margaret River and Noosa and Angourie and the Gold Coast, and they say the surfers came, and then the hordes followed.
Yeah, you only have to stroll down Seminyak to know that.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's wild. You watch that classic movie, The Morning of the Earth, and you see there's that one or two shots of the cliff tops, and you're like, well, it doesn't look like that.
Yeah.
It's just like a Hilton hotel hanging off the edge. And
my God. I went to Bali for the first time in about 20 years in 2017, and I went out to Uluwatu, and I was just, it was unrecognisable. I was so disoriented. I just could not get my bearings because there was nothing familiar. There were no familiar landmarks. Like the whole contour and geography of the place had been completely obscured by all these hotels and bars and incredible.
we could talk about the benefits for the lifting a local essentially subsistence farming culture out of the edge of poverty and giving them access to healthcare and education through tourism, but that's a whole other story. But I'm sure it goes hand in hand with your work. At what point did surfing look like it was going to become a career? Because surfing, it's one of the most bananas things. At the time, there's anywhere between 48 and 50 something. It's Formula One, I think, is the shitter one. There's 22 or 24 drivers. That's it. Surfing is 48 or something crazily. It's a tiny amount considering how many board shorts are sold each year. The amount of surfers that actually go on tour, it's really limited. So as far as a career, when did that start becoming a possibility?
It was pretty ridiculous, really. I mean, I got a traditional newspaper cadetship at the old Melbourne Sun. And as I said, I'd got smitten with surfing. And so, one of the first things I did at the newspaper as a lowly cadet was start pestering my chief of staff to write a surfing column. And they sort of begrudgingly agreed. And then, as I got a bit bolder, a couple of years in, I convinced them to send me down to Bells Beach to cover the annual Rip Curl Pro. And I've got a favourite anecdote about going to Bells for the first time as a reporter and bumping into a reporter from our sister afternoon newspaper, back when afternoon newspapers were a thing, the Herald, and he was a police reporter. And I was like, mate, what are you doing here? Like, I could file for the Herald if you need a story, and also you're on police rounds. Why are you covering a surfing contest? And he said, it's a bit of a slow Easter. I thought I'd come down and see if there was a drug bust or a riot at the Torquay Hotel. And it's always stuck with me now that the Rip Curl Pro is one of the 5 landmark sporting events in Victoria every year, that in 1985, which isn't that long ago, it was still regarded as a potential crime scene rather than a sporting event,
And so that went, obviously that started to, become a bigger and bigger thing for you. When did you make the leap out of newspapers?
I saw an ad in my copy of Tracks magazine in early 1986 asking for applicants for the associate editor's position.
Wow.
And I thought, Tim Baker from Blackburn ain't getting a job at Tracks. I mean, Nick Carroll's the editor, and I knew he was Tom Carroll's brother, and Phil Jarrett had been my first surfing literary hero, and these guys were celebrities as much as the pro surfers in my world.
Yeah.
And there was no way that I was getting a job at Tracks, but I sent in an application anyway, literally with as much expectation as buying a scratchy from the newsagent, just full Hail Mary. And unbeknownst to me, Tracks had been bought by a mainstream publisher, this very urbane Englishman named Philip Mason, who also published Australian Playboy and Australian Cricket and all these sort of mainstream magazines, and dragged the Tracks crew from their beach house in Whale Beach into downtown Darlinghurst in Crown Street.
Yeah.
And he had declared that they hire a proper journalist who could surf a bit rather than a proper surfer who could write a bit, and that was how I got the job.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about off air. We talked a little about luck, and you know, you can define luck in many ways, but for me, it's always been where hard work and preparation meet opportunity.
I love that saying. It's funny you bring that up. I saw it painted on the side of a car once, and it just hit me between the eyes.
Yeah.
And words to live by, I reckon. I've had multiple examples through my life.
The serendipity of that moment you cannot possibly plan for, and it's completely out of your control. Yet, going through our life, we can just, if we have this idea of like, I want to make this my job, or I want to become an engineer for something, or I want to work in hydrology, or I want to be a chef, you can take responsibility for how ready you are.
Yeah,
you know?
Totally.
And that can give you agency and drive and direction and focus, and you can be free to make mistakes without high stakes. Yeah. And then if you eventually make yourself just undeniable when the choice comes and your name happens to be there, some fluke. But you do have to throw the grass into the wind a bit. You do have do have to get up there. And, you know, in my own story, I just wrote letters to every radio station in the city, you know, and someone went, I remember that bloke. He used to be a roadie at the club I worked at. Let's get him in. And that was it.
Yeah.
You know, no one's going to know that you're ready. So you do have to take that step, and you have to look for those moments of serendipity and try to increase those moments, but you've got to spend the time getting ready. No one's going to come knock on your door going, mate, we'd like to make you the chief of the biggest surfing magazine in Australia, please. We came and found you. Nobody knew that you could do it. You have to, it's really, really important. And, you know, as you said, it's happened heaps in your career, but staying ready, what is staying ready or staying prepared, or, you know, what does that do for you in the moment between those jobs?
Oh, well, I think you just do the thing that's in front of you as well as you can do it. And you can have these distant, lofty goals. And I think sometimes we get caught up, you know, shooting for the stars and trying to manifest these really grand, you know, ambitions. But, you know, in reality, it's often just a series of small steps. And so you do the next thing that's in front of you to the best of your ability and just be all in and super committed. And they're like little pavers, you know, like little garden stepping stones that kind of lead you along the path where you want to go. That's how I look at it.
You've had such a successful career as a journalist and as an author. I owned High Surf. I loved it. It was such a great book.
Thank you.
You wrote the book about Occy, which Mark Occhilupo is one of the more interesting Australian athletes. He's an extraordinary human. And
he absolutely is, yeah.
And what makes him who he is and how he is who he is worth exploring. We do hear a lot about other Australian athletes, whether they be, you know, race car drivers or cricketers or whatever. But there's something about Mark Occhilupo. There's very few sports at the A level of a sport where you can actually die trying to win it. And surfing is, like, Formula One has so many safety things in there. It's really unlikely. But surfing, you could die really easily.
Yeah. And it's not just the waves; it's the sharks. You know, like it's like having a crocodile wander onto Centre Court Wimbledon. You know,
it's true. It's so true. It's so true. I'm interested to know, as someone who's probably seen more elite athletes come and go and face extraordinary challenges, whether it be someone like Mick Fanning with the unbelievably heavy personal stuff that he went through, and not only with himself but in his family. It's all quite well documented. I'm not saying anything out of school.
Sure.
But, you know, also, you know, seeing what was going on with, you know, as Lane Beachley was trying to push and push for parity and in prize money and stuff like that. Is there a commonality that you saw amongst those athletes in surfing that, you know, carried with the people that eventually held those trophies aloft?
Yeah, I always remember something Rabbit said to me, Wayne Rabbit Bartholomew, 1978 world champion. I mean, I know you know that, but for the benefit of your listeners, because his was the first biography I wrote. And so, you know, that will always be such a special experience for me. But Rabbit once said to me, you look at this sort of pantheon of great Australian surfers, and most of them had a bit of an axe to grind with life. They came from broken homes or some sort of dysfunctional family life, and they were kind of pissed off, and they let it all out in the water. And I mean, we talked about Davo earlier, and he was a bit like that, but just somehow never found the kind of scaffolding to keep him on track. But yeah, a lot of those great surfers, MR is probably the exception. Super stable, super supportive family life, really wholesome, But you look at a lot of the others, Ockie, Gary Elkerton, Barton Lynch, Tom Carroll, a lot of them lost parents, or I was just writing and researching about a guy named Kevin the Head Brennan from Bondi, who was really the first original Australian surfing casualty, at Bondi when it was considered Scum Valley, and died a sad junkie death after being the best surfer in the country, So it's a fine line between, those guys who've been able to harness that, whatever that sort of emotional drive and often pain is, and the ones for whom it just pulled them under,
There is the concept of using emotional energy, negative emotional energy, and harnessing it for your own good is a very powerful one. And I'm sober, Tim. I'm 12 years sober. And I once heard somebody say to me, someone from that community, say to me, I've got this brain that refuses to see the world in any other way except this thing. So instead of alcohol, I chose to make this particular aspect of their career that thing. And now I'm unstoppable because I have used this thing that I cannot not do, and I've refocused it. And this person is now on like the perfect tale of sobriety that I didn't believe was true when I first got sober. That's a huge thing. Sometimes it takes work, but if you can do that, you're absolutely right, Tim. You free yourself. Every time someone fucks you off, you're like, actually, thank you for that, because now my body is full of, I've felt like I've just drunk a triple espresso, and I'm going to use this, and I'm going to do something good for me and my family versus scream at you, because that's just a waste of time. And this you've written so many books. Kids books that have been turned into stage plays and made kids summer holidays. The Surfer and the Surfer and the Mermaid played out all over the country. Like, must have been amazing. You were in your late 40s when your health kind of took a bit of a turn. What was the lead up to that, and what was the first kind of moment that you knew something was up?
I just turned 50 when my wife had sort of mentioned I was getting up to go to the toilet during the night more frequently. And I just thought that was one of the things that happened as you got older, And then I was in California doing some work on a series of sort of online documentaries. And I was at the offices of a place called Surfline, who were the sort of pioneers of modern surf forecasting. And it was one of those offices where you had to get a key from reception to go to what Americans call the restroom. And I was having to ask for this key so frequently it was getting embarrassing, So I just started hanging around outside the men's room waiting for someone else to go in or out so I could just slip in. And I thought, this is kind of weird. So, I got home and went to have the post-turning 50 checkup and, had the digital examination, which I would like to reassure men is no big deal. And everyone, when they turn 50, should do it. And if you've got a family history of prostate cancer, you should probably do it from age 40. And he
hang on, let's just back that up a bit, and I mean that literally, because it's something that I've had a number of times, and I've worked closely with Movember on and off over the years, quite intensely for a while. I was made a podcast around for a little while, but for a long time, men were really reluctant to get their prostate checked because it meant someone else having their finger in their bottom. And what would you say to men who might be afraid of that?
It doesn't hurt, and it doesn't call your sexuality into question, and it could save your life.
And that's really the thing, isn't it? That's we were talking about the kind of weird, toxic, blokey surf culture before. Like, if I have a doctor trying to keep me alive, and part of that is they put their finger in my bum, it doesn't change the fact that I am a heterosexual man.
Exactly.
That's it. It's fine.
It's completely fine. It's not, I wouldn't queue up for it, but
and
I
yet
wish
every woman listening to us now is going, you fucking lightweights. Have you ever heard of a pap smear? Like,
yeah,
do they have a pair of barbecue tongs up your cloaca? No.
yeah.
Like,
It's
my
very
God.
quick. Yeah.
It's like,
But yeah, blokes get very, very weird about it.
yeah. But even so, like, now there's a blood test you can do that can give you the indicator of if you need to even have that. So you can just get a blood test to check a certain blood level if that indicates something along those lines, which is even more amazing. So you go and have your post 50 checkup, which is incredible in our country of Australia. We have healthcare that's accessible and free if you need it.
Yeah.
We do not appreciate that enough, because there are plenty of countries where that doesn't happen. And so you have this checkup, and okay, I'll call you with the results. What were those days like? Did you have an inkling that something might have been up?
Yeah, a couple of months before, I'd been getting some pain in my leg, my right thigh, and it just sort of came and went over a few days, and so I didn't think too much about it. But then when I went for that checkup, things moved quite quickly.
Yeah.
The GP registered concern from the digital examination that the prostate was enlarged and it was hard, which are not good signs, but I didn't really know what that meant.
Yeah.
So I went for a ultrasound and a PSA test, and then I was referred to a urologist. And I had a referral to see the urologist in about a week's time, and I got a call from their receptionist sounding very kind of worked up, very urgent. We've had a cancellation this afternoon. We can see you this afternoon. Please come straight in. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, why? Anyway, so I remember going in, and he said to me, the blood test you mentioned is called a PSA test, or a prostate-specific antigen test, which is an enzyme that your prostate secretes. And if there's too much of it, then something's awry. And I remember he said to me, a normal PSA is 3 or less. It really starts ringing alarm bells for us if it hits 10. Yours is 120.
Fucking hell.
And
what happens in your body when you hear that?
I remember this sort of rising, it's like a rising sense of dread just kind of moving up your body. And I actually had to get him to repeat. I said, can you just say that again for me?
Yeah.
And he repeated it. And then it was just referrals for more tests, bone scans, MRIs, and then agonising sort of 2-week wait for all those results to come in which time, of course, I'm furiously consulting Dr. Google and trying to reassure myself that, a PSA test is, not completely reliable, that it can just indicate some sort of benign enlargement of the prostate or an infection or something.
What are the conversations? What are conversations you're having with your family?
Well, the only person who I really spoke to about it at that point was my wife, because I thought there's no point alarming everyone until we know exactly what we're dealing with.
Yeah. How did she take it? Because it's not just a one person, illness.
And prostate cancer specifically is often spoken of as a couple's disease because it does impact
we'll get to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, look, she was trying to be reassuring. She's an acupuncturist and has a health science degree as well as a traditional Chinese medicine qualification. So, she was trying to reassure me. But I think we both, as we kind of got into it, it's kind of like the higher the PSA score is, the more likely it is something sinister, not just some sort of benign, issue that can be easily resolved. And then we went back to see the urologist, and I just remember him putting this bone scan up on one of those wall-mounted light boxes, and there was just this enormous kind of white smudge where my right femur or thigh bone should have been. And he sort of indicated it with his pen and said, well, this more or less confirms our suspicions. And it's hard to describe that moment. I think in the book I talk about it being like a needle stuck in a record, or this like feedback loop of dissonance, like this can't be happening, this is happening, this can't be happening, this is happening. just your mind is just kind of not able to compute what is going on, because surely this can't be my fate. And I remember I was trying to gather my thoughts, and my wife said, "Can we just back up for a moment? Are you saying that's cancer in Tim's leg?" And he said yes.
He didn't
And
say the word.
not initially. He just, at that
Wow.
point, all he'd said was, "This more or less confirms our suspicions," which, I knew what that meant. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Isn't that
it was.
fascinating though? It's still this word that we daren't say.
Yeah. And, I've written this book as part of a creative writing PhD in an act of blind optimism that,
Yeah.
to begin a PhD 5 years into a 5-year predicted survival time is probably the definition of optimism. But, yeah, I'm really interested in the language of cancer, and that's kind of my PhD topic is towards a new language of cancer to try
Tim,
and take.
it's extraordinary having that take on this, because both my parents were doctors, and these two medical professionals. My mom was an anaesthetist who retrained as a GP and an acupuncturist. My father was a rheumatologist. Mum's passed away, and I remember Mum saying something about, the neighbour down the road, it's the big C. It's like, you're a fucking doctor, and
Yeah.
even she daren't speak it.
Yeah.
She daren't speak this thing.
It's like the other C word.
Yeah. It is. It so is. It so is. And boy, I'm glad you were not alone in that room. What do you go get lunch? What happens after that?
I mean, this is part of my gripe with the health system. I remember my wife was just gripping my hand so tight, I thought she was going to break my fingers.
Yeah.
And the last time she did that was when she was giving birth to our children in this same hospital.
Wow.
And as I write in the book, they were both cases of little clusters of cells dividing that had brought us here.
Yes.
New life and a threat to my life. I mean,
oh my God,
really kind of
that's
slaps
poetic,
you in the face with, I don't know, the nature of our sort of fragile existence, I guess.
What's it like? Do they hand you a pamphlet and go, here's a number to call? Or do they go, okay, I'll line you up with this psychologist and that therapist and these, what happens?
Well, no, they say we're going to, well, in this case, he said, we're going to refer you to an oncologist who can talk to you about further treatment options. We'll get you started on hormone therapy straight away. I mean, no discussion, no sort of concept of informed consent, warning you what this treatment involves.
Yes.
Just very perfunctory, as if there isn't even a decision to be made. We'll get you started on hormone therapy straight away. We'll refer you to an orthopaedic surgeon in case that leg requires pinning for what he called a pathological fracture, which didn't sound good. And so handed me some scripts for gnarly painkillers and these referrals. And then we just stepped out of his office back into the reception, where the world appeared to be just going about its business as it had been 15 minutes earlier.
Holy shit.
Elderly people thumbing trashy magazines and watching daytime television, and a receptionist who made a couple of appointments for me, and then gave me a handy brochure called Understanding Prostate Cancer, which gave me a wonderful bit of advice that I should get the most out of life by playing with my grandchildren. Because prostate cancer was considered an old man's disease. And at 50, I was considered very young to be diagnosed, particularly with advanced metastatic prostate cancer. And my children were 9 and 13 at the time. And I remember Kirsten and my wife, stepped out of that reception into one of those, long, white, soulless hospital corridors.
Yeah.
And I just remember sort of falling back against the wall and just going, fuck. And then I don't even remember there was 6 floors up, getting down the lift and sort of walking through the car park. The next memory I have is just sitting in the car, the two of us just bawling our eyes out.
Yeah.
Just kind of going, what do we do? And I guess it's only later that I've reflected, like, why do we handle the delivery of a diagnosis like that in this way? Why do we send people back out into the world with having just kind of given them PTSD, with no tools to cope?
I'm so sorry that is how that happened to you. Like, I've recently had, experiences with orthopedic surgeons with my hip replacement and stuff. And I've got to tell you, man, eye contact and empathy goes a long, long way in the medical profession. Like I understand why some doctors have to be disassociated. I understand, like, if you're chopping people's bones up and you're putting pins in and stuff, you just got to be right. This is just bits and pieces. This is not a human. This is not a mother or a father or a son. This is just, I've just got to do this, get that right, get the length right, sew it, great, I'm done. Because if they start thinking about too much.
That's why doctors can't treat their own family members, because they can't have that emotional attachment, or they'll make
and I understand that, but it happens more now in the training, but there are this cohort of medical professionals that kind of went into the world without that. And, from my experience, watching the way my own parents did it, they're older people. My mum's passed away, as I said. My dad's still around, but he doesn't practice. Mum always used to say that, people have forgotten that there's magic in medicine. And when she went from a general practice to, they essentially got conglomerated by some gigantic health thing, and it went from just her and another doctor and receptionist to this 58-person waiting room with 7 treatment rooms, and them going, all right, every 6 minutes you need to see another patient for the bulk billing. She's like, and you need to learn how to use a computer. I'm 64. I can't, what the fuck? And she would come home going, this is not medicine. Medicine is talking to someone and understanding their life. And it takes longer I can't do this in 6 minutes. But that's what she was, faced with. And I remember asking my dad about it, a rheumatologist, which is an autoimmune, no cures. There's just lifestyle management, quality of life. I said, how do you tell someone really bad news? And I'll never forget it. And I use it all the time in my own life. So, normally I'll go and make a cup of tea. And how do you have I'm going to have a cup of tea. You like a cup of tea? I'd like a cup of tea. So it comes back in and bring a cup of tea. And so they're holding something warm. And then he says the words, this is what it is. And this is, what it means. And then he said, you have to understand that these things happen. They're nobody's fault. And the sooner that you can accept that it's happening, the sooner that we can all get about the business of making sure that you have a great life, even though it's here.
Yeah. Wow. I wish I'd seen him.
Fuck, right? Like, it's not hard. Yeah. It's not hard. It's like 18 words, but it can change. Like, the fact that your doctor at the time just went, and your wife was in the room, bang, hormone therapy, not even like, so we're about to shut off your testosterone. Yeah. That is going to basically, and I have been on antipsychotics, mate, so I know what that's like. It's like, that means that you could be standing at a pedestrian crossing as a, completely faithful, fit man, a beautiful 21-year-old girl in a summer dress walks by, part of your body still goes, ooh, like, it's still, and that's going to go and be turned off like a fucking light switch. And you are still going to have to maintain intimacy and the fact that your wife feels wanted but there's conversation around that.
No counselling, nothing around that. And even just the practical strategies that, might have allowed us to manage that better. I still get angry when I think about that.
I'm so sorry that happened to you, mate.
I mean, it's been a powerful experience in a way, because it's driven, the writing of the book. And I had the head of urology at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Hospital contact me, and he said, I've told all my colleagues that they have to read your book before they prescribe hormone therapy to anyone.
Fuck yeah.
So that was pretty, I thought that's pretty impactful.
That's a win, mate. That is an absolute win. That is a direct line from what happened to you in that room to what you clearly, you wrote about the book. And that's a direct line from this is not okay to I've made a difference. So no matter how well the book sells, I'm thrilled that that's happened, because you've
Yeah,
now
no, me
changed.
too.
There's other men and other women and other partners of those men and women who will be grateful that their doctor got told to do that. Was there much conversation about the effect of what kind of treatment you were about to undergo? Did you understand much about chemotherapy, radiation therapy?
Not really. I mean, I was terrified by the idea of chemotherapy without having a sort of great sort of understanding of it. But I knew it was poison, and it would make my hair fall out, make me feel terrible. But it's interesting with prostate cancer. Traditionally, they would just do the hormone therapy initially, and then they'd save chemotherapy once hormone therapy had failed. But
Yeah.
there'd been some recent research to suggest that early chemotherapy combined with hormone therapy would increase survival times by up to 14 months. And at this stage, when you're talking 5 or 6 years, 14 months feels like a good little bonus,
Yeah.
even though you're going to spend 6 months of that feeling like shit.
Yeah.
We went and got a second opinion from one of the leading authorities on prostate cancer in the country, and she repeated the opinion that I was a prime candidate for early chemo because I was young and what they termed chemo fit, that I would tolerate it reasonably well. I mean, what a great thing to be, chemo fit.
God. Good on you for getting a second opinion and early on in your health journey demonstrating your advocacy for your own outcome. Not saying that you know better, not saying that, I read Google, I know how to do this, but at least understanding that, my outcomes, I just want to be sure of this. And that's really important for people to hear. That's super, super
absolutely.
important.
As is having another person in the room with you, because they say when you're getting news like that, you just switch off. You might retain 10% of the information, like after the words, "This confirms our suspicions," I'm not quite sure how much more I absorbed after that,
Mate, in my own experience, mate, the moment I started taking Audrey to meetings with doctors, things started getting a lot better. Because you're exactly right. I just get muddled, and it was just it's really, really, really important. It doesn't have to be your intimate partner, just to somebody else,
someone, mate,
just someone else. Now, I'm guessing at the time you don't to surf waves that can potentially kill you, even like on a weekend. People drown all the time. Unfortunately, it happens, and that's just being not quite fit enough for the conditions, because you're dealing with sometimes, certainly in whether summer or winter, depending on what part of the country you're in, you're talking big swells. You could get held underwater for a long time. You got to kind of stay pretty fit. I'm guessing you're a pretty fit person.
Well, I kind of thought I was, but I think surfing can almost be a little bit misleading like that, because it makes you feel so good. You could surf 2 or 3 times a week and feel great, but if there wasn't surf, I didn't do much other exercise. And I had a desk job at a computer. And I remember when I started going to Pilates, my instructor said, how long have you kind of been leading this fairly sedentary lifestyle? And I was like, sedentary? My lifestyle's not sedentary. I'm a surfer, damn it. But, when I thought about it, sitting at a computer 8 hours a day, chasing deadlines and sweating on the next contributor check to turn up in the mail, back when we got checks in the mail,
Yeah. I remember the first time I stood on a reformer, I was a runner at that point, and the first time I ever tried a reformer, I was like 34, 35, fucking kicked my ass. Like I was like, Jesus Christ, what is kind of I was invented by a German, of course. Just like brutal things. Amazing piece of machinery.
But
damn, it'll show up.
Such good physiotherapy, and it's been a big part of my self-care.
So you obviously, I'm guessing, like once, if you're between you and your wife and you're kind of a health kind of focused mindset, once you got this diagnosis, you're like, right, what can I control? And that's it. The shopping list changes and the smoothies are made, I'm guessing.
Yeah. I mean, Kirst did an amazing job sort of assembling a team for me, just sort of through her professional network, found me a dietitian and a physiotherapist. And after about 5 attempts, I found a psychologist who I liked. It took me a while, but that's another bit of advice I'd share is don't be put off if your first attempt at going to see a psychologist doesn't feel particularly helpful.
Tim, I always talk about it like I talk about it like dating. You go to speed dating. All the time. Like, if you got your mental health plan, which is I think now 20 sessions, which you can do a lot in 20 sessions. Take 10 minutes, 15 minutes on the phone. See if you vibe with them. Like, you can do telehealth, so you can talk to someone anywhere in the country if you want.
Yeah.
If it's okay if it doesn't work for you. It's all right. Other people will align with that person, and that's fine. It's you said number 5. That's a good number. Like, that means you've gone, no, I need more out of this. I'm about to get really intimate and need to trust this person. It's okay and they're fine with it. They are so fine with it because they would rather someone they vibe with as well.
Totally.
I'm glad you found someone.
I have this great psychologist now, and I did a couple of things like meditation has been really key for me. I've done a bunch of, I think I've done 4 Vipassana meditation retreats.
Holy shit.
I went to this residential retreat down in Victoria run by a guy named Ian Gawler, the sort of noted cancer survivor, and he had a huge influence on me. He's an amazing guy. He was told he had 3 months to live about 40 years ago. And,
wow.
One of the first things he taught me was he says, believe the diagnosis but not the prognosis. And so, you've been given a diagnosis, but as he says, a prognosis is based on statistical averages that need not apply to you as a unique individual. And, I came to understand that most cancer survival times, they form a kind of a bell curve. So for prostate cancer, small numbers of men might die sooner, but most men might die around the 5 or 6 year mark for metastatic prostate cancer. And then it sort of goes down. But the thing that's really interesting is those graphs have a really long tail, indicating very small numbers of men who live much longer, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
And so I was lucky. One of the good things my oncologist said to me early on was explaining this bell curve and saying, you want to be in the tail. And I said, well, what do we know about these men in the tail? And unhelpfully, he said, well, not much. And I said, well, don't you study them? And he said, well, no, it's kind of hard to do that sort of research retrospectively because people don't always accurately self-report what they've been doing kind of after the fact. And, human memories are faulty witness and all that kind of thing. And I just thought, I don't know, that's not really good enough. Like, if there's men who are living 10, 15, 20 years, surely we can learn from that. And so that just became a real focus of mine. As I said, my kids were 9 and 13 at the time. So I decided 10 years was my goal. I wanted to try and live for 10 years. And that seemed like a realistic goal to work towards, just to see my kids to adulthood, I guess, was the driver. Yeah.
And so now you've got that. Now you've got the why. What form does the how take?
How to stay healthy? Well, I very early on, I think being a writer, I kind of like wordplay and stuff, and you can easily get lost down these kind of wormholes on the internet and suffer a kind of information overload. And so early on, I kind of arrived at this little self-care mantra that tried to distill down all this information that I'd been processing. And that was the other thing. I think as a journalist, you get quite good at processing large amounts of information and then trying to distill it down in a way that's quite accessible and easy to digest. And so my self-care mantra became, I just need to take my meds, MEDS, and that stands for meditation, exercise, diet, and sleep. And they became the 4 pillars of my self-care. And I see you nodding very kind of knowingly because I imagine you've kind of embraced similar.
Mate, I've got that. My M is there's meditation and medication. So there's 2 for my M.
Yeah. It's funny because there was a couple of typos in the book, and at one stage, meditation got spelled as medication, and I'm like, no, it's meditation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But it's
I mean,
it's true. It's
yeah.
absolutely true. And I kind of talk about this when I speak on stage. People, they have an idea about what happens when you check into a psych ward. And Rosie Waterland, she's been on the show. She talked. I said, what's the first afternoon like in a psych ward? She goes, well, the first thing they do is they make sure your meds are okay. They make sure they get you moving. There's an OT that comes around. They kind of help you. They give you like really good food because you're probably forgetting that you're eating properly or whatever. And then they make sure that you. And the first week is basically that. Making sure that your meds are right, that you're moving your body, that you're eating right, and that you're sleeping enough.
Yeah.
Why do we have to wait to go to a psych ward for that?
Yeah, it should be, life skills we're all taught, really,
Yeah. Did you find taking a sense of agency around those things, like these are the things that I can control? Did that give you did that put some distance between you and the man who was in the hallway, wondering what the fuck's going to happen?
I mean, because it was really frustrating because I was basically given the message by the sort of medical mainstream that there was nothing I could do to improve my prognosis. I remember going to see my GP and he said, there's no cure for this. Don't go looking. Because they worry about people spending money on, snake oil salesmen and all that kind of thing. But still, it's
great. I'm going to Puerto Rico to a retreat.
Yeah. And I've seen people do that, or India or other places, and it's ended horribly, So I knew that I didn't want to put all my faith in some kind of spurious alternative thing. And that's one of my big arguments is that whole argument between mainstream and alternative or complementary medicine, I see as a false dichotomy, as if we have to choose between them. Whereas I guess I try and take that slightly Buddhist approach that the answer is in the middle way. And, so you need everything. You need everything at your disposal. And I read a great book early on called Anti-Cancer, A New Way of Life. And I can never pronounce the author's name, David Schreiber or something. And he was a medical researcher who diagnosed his own brain tumour when a research subject didn't turn up for a brain scan he was doing as part of his research. So he filled in and diagnosed his own brain tumour, but then kept himself alive for about 20 years with a combination of mainstream and alternative medicine. He's no longer with us. He lived for 20 years, but he eventually, succumbed to his disease. But he really influenced my thinking on this sort of integrative approach to cancer care, just having all the tools on the table.
So you're looking for the middle way. So there's a line, but I'm sure it's like, it's like when people are new parents for the first time and they're flicking through Instagram and it says, well, if you don't have this, you're a bad parent because your baby needs, I need to buy this. If you are ripe for exploitation from all sides. So how do you find, okay, this is the stuff that the oncologists have told me I need to do, and there's enough of this stuff that also makes me feel like something is like, how do you find the line? How do you find what is worth it and not a waste of money, waste of time, waste of hope?
Yeah. Well, it does need to be evidence-based. And I think, my journalistic training allowed me to do some of, it's a really loaded term these days to say you're doing your own research. But I think as a journalist, you get a sense of what is a credible and a not so credible sort of resource. Yeah. And, there was very clear evidence around exercise, for example. And it was my naturopath who, doctors are completely dismissive of, who first alerted me to the research around exercise. No oncologist, no doctor had talked to me about exercise. And she said there's this incredible research around high-intensity interval training for men with metastatic prostate cancer, increasing survival times and mitigating the side effects of treatment. And no one had made me aware of it.
Hang on. So the idea of someone with stage 4 metastatic prostate cancer doing burpees is just that no one would put those two things together.
No, it's kind of counterintuitive. And for a long time we've thought, cancer patients are frail, they need lots of bed rest, and it's the complete opposite. There's incredible research going on. Edith Cowan University in Perth have a chemo ward with a gym next door. And people have
Wow.
chemotherapy and go straight into the gym because it helps mitigate the side effects of chemo, and it actually improves the efficacy of the chemo. So there are things like this. In my case, with prostate cancer, hormone therapy. Let's list some of the side effects of hormone therapy. So complete loss of libido and sexual function, loss of bone density and muscle mass, increased risk of cardiovascular disease, increased risk of diabetes, 4 times more likely to commit suicide. And exercise helps address all those things and more. And as I say, if there was a drug that did for us what exercise does, they would be shouting it from the rooftops,
Yeah.
And so I was lucky that I had a naturopath who was a former oncology nurse, so she had that medical background, but she
Right.
was right across the latest research. And so that's all I needed. Like, tell me something to do and I'll do it,
Yeah.
Just give me something to do.
Having some agency in your own outcomes is so, so, so important.
Yeah.
And but part of that, though, was like, whether it be the journalistic background going, there's got to be I just want to corroborate this source. I want to hear this from someone else's mouth to be sure that this thing happened before I print it. That also led you to, like, I believe your first oncologist, like, there might be a different way here I'm going to see. Now, it's one thing to swap doctors because you don't get on with them or you're not thrilled by the way they're looking at you, but it's another thing to swap doctors because they've told you the facts and you don't want to accept them. But it sounds like what was happening with you was kind of more the former.
Yeah, it was a kind of gradual thing that I got a bit disillusioned with my first oncologist. I've got no question about his expertise and his knowledge. It was that lack of empathy,
Yeah.
And it's interesting because people say, well, it's a self-protective thing that, compassion fatigue is real and, doctors can't be emotionally invested in every patient. But if it's a self-protective thing, it's not working because oncologists have a terrible mental health profile themselves. And so, I suggest that they might be better off if they allowed themselves a normal range of human emotions and some genuine human empathy, because the protective thing ain't working for you.
Reading your work, it did make me think about, because you talk about that in your book. You talk about that, and there's a huge amount of empathy as well that you've even written that. You write about how not only is cancer diagnosis and treatment just devastating on the patient and their family, but also every doctor and nurse and every healthcare professional that comes in contact with them, you're literally dealing with people who are on death's door, some of them children, all fucking day, every day. And then you're going to go home and put dinner on and deal with your 15-year-old who doesn't want to put the iPad down. Jesus, like, I thought about this as a mate. Somebody I know. They work with kids who are going through trauma. Like they are a part of the immediate treatment plan of trauma. They do 2 days a week because anymore, and they cannot be good at their job because they have to be there with the kid. They have to be present in that moment with the kid.
Yeah.
But the economics of an oncologist holding an office with thousands of dollars a month in rent, employing staff, they got to keep the patients coming through the door to pay for it all.
Yeah. My average oncology visit would be 5 or 10 minutes,
God damn.
And it's my life hanging in the balance, And so, I talk about in the book this one particular appointment where I'd sat in the waiting room for an hour. You're surrounded by people who look very frail and ill, and it's not a great atmosphere. And, I'd had another 5 or 10 minute appointment where he'd looked at my blood test and gone, keep taking this drug and I'll see you in 6 weeks. And I got up to leave and I stopped and I turned around and I said, look, I've been working really hard at this. I've been seeing you for 4 years. I meditate twice a day. I exercise daily. I try and eat a plant-based diet. How do you think I'm doing? Just to kind of give him the opportunity to offer me some encouragement.
Yeah.
And he stopped and he seemed a bit annoyed because this was this sort of off-script moment and he had a waiting room full of patients.
Yeah.
He thought about it and he eventually went, you're about average. Some of my patients are doing better, some worse. You're about average. Went, okay, right. And talk about the fact that he had this one of those motivational prints on the wall of his waiting
No.
room saying, trust your instincts. And so I walked out of that appointment and I took that advice and I trusted my instincts and I never went back. Went back to him.
Oh, mate, I'm sorry. Yeah, bedside manner is, like I said, my mum would always say, it's like that's half of the medicine, because you've got to have the patient believe that the treatment will work, because that is such a huge part of getting better, is the belief in that the treatment will work. This is why people who knowingly take a placebo for chronic back pain experience a pain relief.
Yeah.
Because they believe brains are amazing things, and that is a part of the medicine delivery of the medical messaging. But I'm guessing you found a better person.
Yeah, I did. And look, in fairness, I mean, one of the challenges in most advanced cancers is there's no cure. Yeah. And so oncologists are walking this tightrope between some sort of palliative benefit that might extend life or reduce suffering or improve quality of life, and an excess toxicity that's going to tip you over into just a more miserable existence for whatever time you have left. And that's a difficult line to walk. It's a difficult line to live as a patient, but it's a difficult thing to have to administer, and they're really inadequately equipped for most of the cases they see, because they can't offer hope or a cure, which makes that bedside manner, I think, even more critical, to be able to offer some sort of emotional sort of comfort.
Which is wild, because you're thinking about a diagnosis that, it's not a one doc job. If you get, if you get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, you're getting a nutritionist, an exercise person, like you're getting this whole team, just boom. Like, it makes no sense to me that in that moment of it's confirms our suspicions, here are the best 3 psychologists that I've known around this. Here is an
this sort of thing.
This is the kind of people you need to talk to as a couple about going through, therapy, because this is not a one-person illness. And, in that moment, because it's not just the nuts and bolts and the cells that are affected by this at all. It is, you are living with essentially this, we all know, like, nobody gets out of this alive, but this is like your clock is well and truly ticking.
Yeah, your whole world has been kind of tipped upside down. Look, some places do it better than others. I think some of the big specialist cancer hospitals, Chris O'Brien Lifehouse in Sydney and Peter McCallum in Melbourne, and God bless her, Olivia Newton-John's Wellness Centre at the Austin Hospital, they do embrace complementary therapies and supportive care. But I think at the average general hospital with a oncology ward, they're maybe not as equipped to offer those sorts of therapies.
What would you say to, not everyone's going to get a cancer diagnosis, but surely everybody listening at some point is going to have to advocate for themselves as a patient. What would you say to people about having that kind of advocacy for your own health outcomes and ways to go about it that don't put people kind of like, you don't know more than me, what are you telling me to do? Like, what would you say? What's a mindset that people might be able to have going into something like this?
You can't afford to be sort of put off by that skewed power dynamic, because it does feel really intimidating. You're sitting on the other side of this broad desk with someone with lots of framed certificates on their wall, and, a lot of them have a very sort of cool professional manner, and it's kind of like, who am I to question your judgment? But if things don't feel okay, you've really got to speak up, and you can't worry about being considered a bad patient or a difficult patient. Be a difficult patient would be my advice, that you have to advocate for yourself, or you have to find people who are able to advocate for you and seek second opinions. And like the psychologist, not most people probably wouldn't go shopping for their oncologist, but if you're not getting what you need, then, do go see another oncologist for a second opinion.
What would you say to people listening about, and I understand this is a heavy question to ask someone in your position, but what would you say to people listening about the concept of acceptance around all that?
Yeah, that's been a huge part of my journey, and it was an absolute turning point, really, in my way of responding and managing the diagnosis, because I realised probably a few years in, maybe 3 years in, that if survival was my only goal, then I was always going to be sweating on every blood test and every scan, and I just couldn't see how any peace lay down that path. And so I guess I just had this realization, and I'd done a bit of reading, a few kind of Buddhist texts that really helped me. No Death, No Fear by Thich Nhat Hanh, and When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron were both very influential in my thinking. That if I could accept my mortality, or if I could work on accepting my mortality, that was something within my power. And, Buddhism teaches us that our life's work is to prepare for death, and a cancer diagnosis is like a bit of a wake-up call, because for most of us, it's the homework we put off until the last minute, until we're kind of confronted with it. And a cancer diagnosis is like a wake-up call to do your homework. And so in a lot of ways, this book was about me doing my homework, and I would meditate on death. I would try and imagine what it felt like. And I remember being at one of those Ian Gawler retreats in Victoria, and there was a young guy who was just horribly pockmarked all over from really aggressive chemotherapy, and he had a bag, and you could see he had been a young, fit surfer, and I learnt from talking to him, a keen skateboarder. He still had that physique beneath this ravaged exterior, but he was the most Zen meditator I'd ever come across. He was like one of those statues of Buddha when he sat.
Yeah.
And he said to me, I'm really curious about death. I think it's going to be this amazing adventure, because he was considered terminal at that stage. And he just had managed to frame it as an adventure that he was curious about. And I just was in awe of him at the time. But it's something that I guess I've tried to work on. I say that if the worst thing that can happen to me is that I die, and I'm okay with that, then I'm okay. And sure, I want to live as long as I can and live well, but I don't want to be in fear of death. And the other thing Ian Gawler said that was really influential was, an acceptance of our mortality is entirely compatible with a will to live. And I think that's a really powerful statement. And so I've sort of tried to kind of live by that.
Once you fully, and I'm sure if, in my own experience, there's a grieving process around acceptance.
Huge.
And it's important to go through. But once you do find yourself at the end of it settled into that acceptance, what then does taking action do for you? Whether that be taking action, eating well, taking action, connecting as meaningfully as you can with your kids. What does that action then do for you?
Well, I mean, you just feel good for a start. Exercise and diet and nutrition are just, they're so fundamental to our experience of being human. So that was quite a revelation. I mean, ironically, people would say to me, I hear you've been really ill. And I'd kind of go, well, yeah, apparently, but I feel fucking great, because I was eating so well and I was exercising. I dropped about 15 kilos.
Wow.
Because I was just going to the gym and eating really clean. And, at age 50, I kind of got acquainted with my abdominal muscles for the first time in my life, So, yeah, it was this strange kind of thing to actually be told I was facing this really dire health crisis, but I felt fantastic. And that was incredibly reassuring. That's sort of where I drew my strength. Like, yeah, I know the diagnosis. As Ian Gawler's counselled me, I don't accept the prognosis. And right here, right now, I feel great. I feel strong. When I meditate, when I surf, when I exercise, when I eat well, I just don't feel like there is room for disease in my body. There's a great character who I once interviewed named Dorian Doc Paskowitz, this old surfing medico in California. And he's written a book called Surfing and Health. And I can't remember the exact quote, but he was saying something like, health is more than the absence of disease. It is this feeling of vigor and vitality that we can achieve by working on it every day. And I really took that to heart as well, that health was more than the absence of disease, that it was cultivating this state of, vigor and pizzazz, I think was one of the words he used,
When it comes to like it's not just about you. It's about your wife and your kids. You've clearly had the conversation with them about what's going on. They're obviously still one of them still pretty young, but they're obviously dealing with. When you do come into that acceptance, what does that acceptance then give you the freedom to do?
Just be really present. Wake up each day and. You can't afford to be projecting into the future too much because it's just going to, you're just going to start grinding your gears and getting caught in catastrophizing. And but I can wake up and I can go surfing and I can spend time with my kids and I can write. And, there's so much that I can still do. And in lots of ways, probably I'm healthier now than I was before my diagnosis, in an odd kind of way. And the other thing Ian Gawler taught me was, if you're not trying to hold death at bay with one hand and then trying to manage your health with the other hand, you can manage your health with both hands, because you're not using one hand just to fend off your fear of death.
Which is this idea that, we're sitting here talking right now and you are probably closing in on the 5 years that they gave you.
Oh, well past,
Yeah.
7,
okay, so you're past the clock's already ticked to zero. We're into the beyond times now.
Bonus time.
What can you tell? You're in bonus hour. What can you tell people about holding this idea of at any moment this could just turn horribly and there's nothing I can do about it? And what a beautiful day it is. Look at the smile on my kid's face. These are two very difficult things to hold on to at the same time, but it's something you've clearly had to learn how to do. What can you talk to us? Can you tell me about, what that, tell people about what that is?
Yeah, it is very much about being present. And I think meditation is probably the most powerful tool for that, because I know that I can sit and I can focus on my nostrils and I can just drop into a place that is still and quiet and peaceful, where I'm not a cancer patient and I'm not thinking about the oncology ward and the next treatment. And I've got this sort of sanctuary that I can retreat to at any time. And then from there I can move out into the world and just embrace all its joys. And, I don't want to give a false impression. I still have dark days, I still lie awake at 3 a.m. sometimes going, what the fuck? This was not the plan, and there's been huge, grief and trauma along the way. But, I feel like I can be fully present, and I paddle out into the ocean some days. And, when I think about the theme of your podcast, Better Than Yesterday, surfing is the ultimate sort of example, because you can wake up every morning hoping that the surf will be better than yesterday, and I walk to the beach and I gaze out at that sort of dawn seascape and try and discern what the waves are doing. And I could have one of the best waves of my life today or tomorrow or the next day,
It's like cricket, like, next ball is going to be the one. It's like you're absolutely right. We spoke a little about the language surrounding cancer, and for many people, this is still a bit of a mystery. What do you wish was said to you, or what's some words that you might care to give us now that we might be able to say to people in our lives who we will know someone who will get diagnosed over the course of our lives? What are some words that would be effective? Or what's some ways that we can talk about it rather than avoiding it?
Yeah. I think a lot of it does come back to that acceptance of mortality. Like, we're so clumsy as a society in talking about and dealing with death, Like, most of us don't have an experience of seeing a loved one after they've passed or sitting with them after they've passed. It's sort of, we've kind of subcontracted it out to professionals to just keep all the unpleasantness away from us. And so I think if, as a culture and a society, we could become more accepting about the inevitability of our death. As someone said, life is like getting on a ship and sailing out to sea knowing that it's going to sink. but we all act with shock. Oh no, this boat's sinking. It's like, yeah, no fucking kidding, it's sinking. They're all going to sink.
Oh, it's so true. That's so true. So what are some words that we might say if, we find out that a relative's been diagnosed, we call them up. What do we say?
Say, I'm here for you. There's so much we can do. There's so much we can do to support you and that you can do to support your health. And there's so much we can do to just suck the marrow from life in the meantime. Let's fucking plan a surf trip, or let's get the band back together, or, like just live fully.
Yeah.
And, what do you want from me? What do you need? Or not even ask questions. Just, I'm going to come around with a really healthy meal. And, or I had a friend diagnosed with a brain tumor, and I just started going over and sitting with him and teaching him to meditate. And I felt like that was the greatest gift I could give him at that time, and get him juicing and eating well. And he recently died, but none of that was in vain. We had such precious moments together, and maybe it bought him a bit more time, with his family. But he was incredibly inspired, and it lifted him out of just feeling, a victim, and, as you say, gave him some agency. So if you can give people just even one tool, it's like my naturopath talked to me about exercise. You don't have to have all the answers, but if you can offer one thing, like, let's get in the ocean, let's just go for a body surf, or I'm gonna start cooking you a healthy meal once a week, or let's sit and meditate, or just be all in. Don't keep your distance. That's the other thing I'm really big on. People sometimes keep their distance after you get a cancer diagnosis, and that sense of social isolation is one of the worst aspects of it. And I've got a couple of really good mates who made it really clear really early on that they didn't care how messy I was, how unraveled I was, whatever kind of emotional state they found me in, that they were going to be able to sit with it and hold space. And I got one great mate who we had a little sort of Mayday call. If I texted him the dancing man emoji, the little John Travolta emoji, that meant I needed him, and he'd come over and just sit with me, talk to me, and just be one of those mates who can sit in those uncomfortable moments. That's probably the most powerful thing.
It's extraordinary that you've been so generous with sharing your story, because you mentioned a couple of really quite high profile, super surviving, cancer, kind of identities, I guess. Yeah. But we have to be in acceptance that is the long tail that we mentioned earlier. That is the kind of the anomaly. And whereas what you're describing is something that we don't often hear. Like, yes, it is happening, and every day is as good as I can fucking make it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really very powerful thing to be sharing, and it's something that's really important for our community. And the empathy that you have for the healthcare professionals who literally spend every day telling people they're going to die is really such a toll on them as well. And that just bringing to light that more needs to be done for the people as well who are in this industry.
We've got to heal the healers, mate, There's a chapter in my book called Physician Heal Thyself, which is a quote from somewhere that I couldn't actually find the origins of, but it was one of those phrases that had stuck in my mind.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty apt.
I could talk to you for a long time, but
me too.
It's a beautiful day, and I don't want you to miss it. So, thank you so much for sharing. Thanks for writing this extraordinary book. You're not McFanning. You're not punching it. You're patting it.
You're
patting the shark.
That was the big lesson. Yeah, I'm not going to just be fighting this thing the rest of my life. I'm going to make my peace with it and swim about the ocean without fear. Yeah.
Beautiful, man. It's a beautiful metaphor, and I'm really grateful for your time, mate. Thank you so much for talking to me, mate.
It's a great pleasure.